Passion Story. It was now 2 days before Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The leading priests and the teachers of religious law were still looking for an opportunity to capture Jesus secretly and kill him.
But not during the Passover celebration, or the people may riot.
An opportunity was provided when Satan entered Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12 disciples, and he went to the leading priests and captains of the temple guard to discuss the best way to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted, and they promised to give him money. So he agreed and began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus so they could arrest him when the crowds weren't around. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, Jesus' disciples asked him,
"Where do you want us to go to prepare the Passover meal for you?"
So Jesus sent 2 of them into Jerusalem with these instructions.
As you go into the city, a man carrying a pitcher of water will meet you. Follow him. At the house he enters, say to the owner, "The teacher asks, where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples?" He will take you upstairs to a large room that is already set up. That is where you should prepare our meal.
So the 2 disciples went into the city and found everything just as Jesus had said, and they prepared the Passover meal there. In the evening, Jesus arrived with the 12. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around them. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him,
"Lord, are you going to wash my feet?"
Jesus replied,
You don't understand now what I am doing, but someday you will.
Peter protested.
"No, you will never, ever wash my feet."
Jesus replied,
Unless I wash you, you won't belong to me.
Simon Peter exclaimed,
"Then wash my hands and head as well, Lord, not just my feet."
Jesus replied,
A person who is bathed all over does not need to wash, except for the feet to be entirely clean. And you disciples are clean, but not all of you.
for Jesus knew who would betray him. That is what he meant when he said, "Not all of you are clean." After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked,
Do you understand what I am doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. And since I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth. Slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them.
A meditation, greatness redefined. Why did you wash their feet? I don't understand. It makes no sense. Why did you do something so demeaning, so distasteful, when you did not have to? Why humble yourself and wash the feet of your own disciples? You are the Messiah. It makes no sense for you, of all people, to do something that should be done by the least of all people, not by the greatest. It is not what we want our Messiahs to do. Unless we have got it wrong, and that somehow this is a measure of what Messiah means. Not that it is defined in greatness, but that somehow in your world the first will be last, and the greatest least, and servant of all. But if we are to follow you, does it mean that we must follow your example too? Are you suggesting that we too should make ourselves humble? that we must wash the feet of people whom we would rather ignore or scapegoat or deride? Must we too become the servants of the least among us, the refugee, the disabled, the homeless, the addicted, the antisocial, the child? Was that what all of this was about? To try and put us in our rightful place, not at the center of our own world, but at the center of yours, where we no longer are the most important person. Is that it? Were you trying to teach us that simple truth? That other people, all other people, should matter too. Is that why you washed their feet? The scripture reading continues. Now Jesus was deeply troubled, and he exclaimed,
I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me.
The disciples looked at each other, wondering whom he could mean. The disciple Jesus loved was sitting next to Jesus at the table. Simon Peter motioned to him to ask,
Who's he talking about?
So that disciple leaned over to Jesus and asked.
Lord, who is it?
Jesus responded,
It is the one to whom I give the bread I dip in the bowl.
And when he had dipped it, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. When Judas had eaten the bread, Satan entered into him. Then Jesus told him,
Hurry and do what you're going to do.
So Judas left at once, going out into the night. As they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying,
Take this and eat it, for this is my body.
And he took a cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. He gave it to them and said,
Each of you drink from it, for this is my blood, which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It is poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many. Mark my words, I will not drink wine again until the day I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom.
A poem, Holy Communion by Anne Weems. Eat, drink, remember who I am. Eat, drink, remember who I am so that you could remember who you are. Eat, drink, remember who I am so you could remember who you are and tell the others. Eat, drink, remember who I am so you could remember who you are and tell the others so that all God's people can live in communion, in Holy Communion. Then they sang a song and went out to the Mount of Olives. On the way, Jesus told them,
Tonight all of you will desert me. For the scriptures say God will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there.
Peter declared,
Even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you.
Jesus replied,
I tell you the truth, Peter. This very night before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me.
Peter insisted,
No, even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. And all the other disciples vowed the same.
Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said,
Sit here while I go over there to pray.
He took Peter and Zebedee's 2 sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them,
My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.
Stay here and keep watch with me. The hour has come. Stay here and keep watch with me. Watch and pray.
He went on a little farther and bowed with his face to the ground, praying,
My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine.
Then he returned to the disciples and found them asleep. He said to Peter,
couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray, so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak.
Stay here and keep watch with me. The hour has come. Stay here and keep watch with me. Watch and pray.
Then Jesus left them a second time and prayed,
My Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done.
Then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. He prayed more fervently, and he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open.
Stay here and keep watch with me. The hour has come. Stay here and keep watch with me. Watch and pray.
So he went to pray a third time, saying the same things again. Then he came to the disciples and said,
Go ahead and sleep, have your rest. But look, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let's get going. Look, my betrayer is here.
And even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They had been sent by the leading priests and elders of the people. Jesus fully realized all that was going to happen to him, so he stepped forward to meet them. He asked,
Who are you looking for?
Jesus, the Nazarene.
They replied.
I am he.
Jesus said. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. As Jesus said, I am he, they all drew back and fell to the ground. Once more he asked them,
Who are you looking for?
and again they replied.
Jesus, the Nazarene.
Jesus said,
I told you that I am he. And since I am the one you want, let these others go.
He did this to fulfill his own statement. I did not lose a single one of those you have given me. Then Simon Peter drew a sword and slashed off the right ear of Malchus, the high priest's slave. But Jesus said to Peter,
Put your sword back into its sheath. Shall I not drink from the cup of suffering the Father has given me?
and he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus spoke to the leading priests, the captains of the temple guard, and the elder who had come for him. He asked,
Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come in with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there every day. But this is your moment, the time where the power of darkness reigns.
Then the people who had arrested Jesus led him to the home of Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of religious law and the elders had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and came to the high priest's courtyard. He went in and sat with the guards and waited to see how it would all end. Inside, the leading priests and the entire high council were trying to find witnesses who would lie about Jesus so they could put him to death. But even though they found many who agreed to give false witness, they could not use anyone's testimony. Finally, 2 men came forward who declared,
This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.
Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus,
Well, aren't you going to answer these charges? What do you have to say for yourself?
but Jesus remained silent. Then the high priest said to him,
I demand in the name of the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God.
Jesus replied,
You have said it. And in the future you will see the Son of Man, seated in the place of power at God's right hand, and coming on the clouds of heaven."
Then the high priest tore his clothing to show his horror and said,
"Blasphemy! Why do we need other witnesses? You have all heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?"
They shouted.
Guilty. He deserves to die.
Then they began to spit in Jesus' face and beat him with their fists, and some slapped him, jeering.
Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who hit you that time?
The guards lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat around it, and Peter joined them there. A servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. Finally, she said,
"This man was one of Jesus' followers."
but Peter denied it.
Woman, I don't even know him.
After a while, someone else looked at him and said, "You must be one of them." Peter retorted.
No, man, I'm not.
About an hour later, someone else insisted, "This must be one of them because he's a Galilean too." But Peter said,
Man, I don't know what you're talking about.
and immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. At that moment, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Suddenly, the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." And Peter left the courtyard, weeping bitterly. Very early in the morning, the leading priests and the elders of the people met again to lay plans for putting Jesus to death. Then they bound him, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, realized that Jesus had been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. So he took the 30 pieces of silver back to the leading priests and the elders.
"I have sinned, for I have betrayed an innocent man."
"What do we care?" they retorted. "That's your problem." Then Judas threw the silver coins down in the temple and went out and hanged himself. Meanwhile, the leading priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be released and for Jesus to be put to death. Then Pilate went back into his headquarters and called for Jesus to be brought to him. He asked him,
"Are you the king of the Jews?"
Jesus replied,
Is this your own question, or did others tell you about me?
"Am I a Jew? Your own people and their leading priests brought you to me for trial. Why? What have you done?"
Jesus answered,
My kingdom is not an earthly kingdom. If it were, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. But my kingdom is not of this world.
Pilate said.
"So you are a king."
Jesus responded,
You say I am a king. Actually, I was born and came into the world to testify to the truth. All who love the truth recognize that what I say is true.
What is truth?
Pilate asked. Then he went out again to the people and told them,
He is not guilty of any crime, but you have a custom of asking me to release one prisoner each year at Passover. Would you like me to release this King of the Jews?
But they shouted back,
No, not this man. We want Barabbas.
Barabbas was a revolutionary. Then Pilate had Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip. The soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put a purple robe on him.
Hail, King of the Jews.
They mocked as they slapped him across the face. Pilate went outside again and said to the people,
I am going to bring him out to you now, but understand clearly that I find him not guilty.
Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said,
Look, here is the man.
When they saw him, the leading priests and the temple guards began shouting.
Crucify him! Crucify him!
Pilate said,
Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find him not guilty.
The Jewish leaders replied, By our law, he ought to die because he called himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was more frightened than ever. He took Jesus back into the headquarters again and asked him,
Where are you from?
But Jesus gave no answer.
Why don't you talk to me?
Pilate demanded.
Don't you realize that I have the power to release you or crucify you?
Then Jesus said,
You would have no power over me at all unless it were given to you from above. So the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin.
Then Pilate tried to release him, but the Jewish leaders shouted, If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar. When they said this, Pilate brought Jesus out to them again. Then Pilate sat down in the judgment seat on the platform that is called the stone pavement. In Hebrew, Gabbatha. It was now about noon on the day of the preparation for the Passover. And Pilate said to the people,
Look, here is your king.
Away with him!
They yelled.
Away with him! Crucify him!
What? Crucify your king?
Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the leading priest shouted back. Then Pilate turned Jesus over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus away. Along the way, they came across a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. 2 others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. When they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross. And the criminals were also crucified, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said,
Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing.
And the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. The crowd watched, and the leaders scoffed. He saved others, they said. Let him save himself if he is really God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers mocked him too by offering him a drink of sour wine. They called out to him, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. A sign was fastened above him with these words, This is the King of the Jews. One of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed.
So you're the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself, and us too while you're at it.
But the other criminal protested.
Don't you fear God, even when you have been sentenced to die? We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man hasn't done anything wrong.
Then he said,
Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom.
And Jesus replied,
I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise.
remember me when you come into your kingdom.
Standing near the cross were Jesus' mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother standing there beside the disciple he loved, he said to her,
"Dear woman, here is your son.
and he said to this disciple,
Here is your mother."
And from then on, this disciple took her into his home. By this time it was about noon, and darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. The light from the sun was gone. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice,
"Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani,"
which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah. One of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, holding it up to him on a reed stick so he could drink. But the rest said, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah comes to save him." When Jesus had tasted it, he said,
"It is finished."
Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
At that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened. The bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead. They left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, and appeared to many people. The Roman officer and the other soldiers at the crucifixion were terrified by the earthquake and all that had happened. They said,
This man truly
Was the Son of God.